Everybody, and I realize I'm standing between you and lunch, so I will try and make it as quick as possible. Can you all hear me all right? Fantastic. Right, so what an opportunity for the RFA to be represented on this group. And honestly, the amount of information that was shared was absolutely staggering and way too much to include in this presentation. However, I'm going to talk about a few high-level insights and things that I learned. And there's a lot of resources that were shared with us, and I'm happy to share it with anybody who is interested in learning a little bit more. So I wanted to start off with this quote by Jules Verne, and he was actually the father of science fiction writing. And in the interest of family and getting to know each other, science fiction is one of my favorite reading genres. But it's eerily accurate, and this was in 1874. I believe that water will one day be employed as either as fuel, either in the form of hydrogen and oxygen, which constitute it, used singularly or together, will furnish an inexhaustible source of heat and light of an intensity of which coal is not capable. So why are we having this discussion, and why is hydrogen so important, or alternative energy, for our industry? So you recall a while back in Paris, South Africa signed an accord where we would have to peak, plateau, and decline our emissions. So there's certain sectors, such as ours, which are really hard to abate from a carbon perspective. But the UN released a report, the IPCC released a report to say, you know, we're really in trouble here because we are heating up quicker than what we expected, and we really need to start looking at how do we fundamentally reduce our carbon emissions. And that brought up the net zero debate. Of course, as alluded to by the ministers as well this morning, is that we cannot just transition without it being just, to take society also into account. And considering that our economy is really based on quite substantially on coal, it is quite a change that we need to look at. And so, again, as I reiterate, we can't do this alone. Collaboration is really, really important. And we have the Green Transport Working Group for you as members to engage with this topic and debate it. It is a debatable topic, a hotly debatable topic often. So we need to engage and we need to discuss and see what are the solutions that are available to us. Part of this engagement and discussion was we formed part of a working group with the National Business Initiative, where we looked at what could the trajectories be to get the transportation industry to a net zero point. And 3 scenarios were identified: fuel greening, technology shift, and modal shift. So just a few concepts before I continue with the presentation. And really, at its simplest, green hydrogen is produced with renewable electricity, where it splits water, and it can be used as a fuel to power fuel cells, battery electric vehicles, and hydrogen fuel cells are used to power heavy trucks and also buses and trains, and also ships. So if you look at the hydrogen value chain, and this is really, really quite critical actually, and it's something that I learned a lot in engaging with all these industry specialists in Europe, is that the value chain is key critical. Obviously, if you don't have infrastructure and you don't have refueling stations, the technology will never get to a commercial level where it's usable. And this is at a very high level, a basic hydrogen value chain, and I will discuss a little bit later in my presentation one that we actually witnessed. Another interesting factor is that there are various colors of hydrogen, and hydrogen that is made from different sources. Obviously, we have a lot of black hydrogen and also grey hydrogen. And actually, one of the things that makes South Africa quite attractive in this whole process is Sasol's experience with the Fischer-Tropsch system, which is quite fundamental in manufacturing hydrogen. Another caveat here is that it's important, the technical expertise here is exceptionally important. There are nuances with all these different stages of hydrogen, and Europe per se is quite a big export market for hydrogen as a fuel source, but they will not look at anything other than green hydrogen. So this is a high-level overview of the team that went, and it was led by the former MEC of Public Transport and Infrastructure, Jacob Mamabelo. We had delegates from Sasol, CSRR, industry representatives, Saboa, and myself from the RFA. And this is with the Ministry of Baden-Württemberg. Now, Baden-Württemberg is actually a very, very, very interesting place. It has the highest density of engineers. It is known as the Innovation Center of Germany. They have 70 universities and about 100 research facilities there. A lot of the OEMs are headquartered in that region. In fact, when we were traveling to a research center, there was a whole train of Porsches that came screaming past us on the Autobahn, and that's where they test the vehicles on the Autobahn, so that was quite exciting to see. And they base their hydrogen strategy on 3 pillars: the manufacture of the hydrogen, the equipment that's supplied, and also the customer, which is the end user, predominantly us as an industry, and that's after-sales parts, support, equipment. A lot of pressure is being put on the OEMs to come up with solutions in this space. So the first insight was, our first actual engagement was with KfW Bank. And KfW Bank are huge in Germany. They're actually government-owned. They're one of the largest banks in the world, 551 billion euros worth. And there's an absolute willingness to finance from this institution. In fact, they've already pumped 200 million into the South African market for hydrogen. And that process was managed by the CSIR through a tender. But there's more money that they're willing to invest and pump into our market. However, there are certain criteria. It has to be renewable energy based, the manufacture of the hydrogen. And it's really important. They're not just looking at sponsoring a few trucks. They're looking at how do we integrate it throughout the supply chain. So let's look at a corridor. Let's look at it, everything from trucks, ships, aviation. They want a solution that integrates infrastructure as well as equipment. One of our other days, and this was really strictly managed, and I had to get special permission to take this photograph, and we also had to have COVID tests before we could even walk into this building, was the central control of the Autobahn. It's really very tightly run, very efficiently run, and every single part of the Autobahn in Germany is under review and managed here at this control center. Accidents, if there is potentially traffic jam, they open up the emergency lane so that they can use it as an extra lane for the highway. They communicate with the drivers through SMSing and also through overhead signage. And it's really an exciting concept, and one that I think we could really benefit from in our major routes in terms of managing risks such as rioting and accidents. I mean, this would be great, right? But could we do it in this country? Maybe. But infrastructure is really going to be quite expensive to have. And, you know, Germany do have some parts, really do have a tram system that they can actually use. But what this basically is a containery system that runs the battery electric vehicle through overhead power lines. And it works really, really well on the Autobahn. And it's a great concept. Whether it's applicable to South Africa or not, we'd like to think so, but it's really going to take a lot of money and infrastructure to get us there. So I think this one we can tick off our list. Another insight was the use of non-motorized transport in cities. In fact, there are no ICE vehicles actually allowed in the city centers. So all the deliveries, the LDVs are all done with electric vehicles. All the taxis are electric. Bicycles everywhere. I mean, you've got bicycle parks of 3 or 4 levels just full of bicycles. And it's really quite interesting navigating the roads. There's dedicated bicycle lanes, and if you're not sure of your footing and what's happening, you can really get ridden over very quickly. I took a tour back in a bicycle taxi, and it was a really great way to have a look at the city. And I must say, from my experience, the air did feel cleaner. It's not as grimy. It just felt different. And another thing which is so important is the public transport system there. It makes it so much easier to get around as a commuter. There's free Wi-Fi, there's charging stations. It really does make things a lot easier for commuters. So we went to the IAA show, and really, I was actually quite astounded. Well, first of all, the team were teasing me because I was like a kid in a candy store, and they couldn't believe, wow, this little blonde chick from South Africa loves trucks, but, you know, it is part of the role. And really, they're saying that Euro 7 will literally be the last ICE vehicle that will be produced. Everything is predominantly electric. There were a few smattering of diesel vehicles, but everything was electric. And also the ranges of the electric are really, really improving and increasing at a rapid rate. We're talking 400 to 500 kilometers now. We're talking charging on a megawatt charger, 20 to 80% in under 30 minutes. So it's becoming more and more competitive, and it's getting there. It's still got a way to go, but it is getting there, and it's getting there pretty quickly. And then I think the piece de resistance of the whole trip was meeting the new Gen H2 truck from Daimler. And another thing which completely floored the delegation was that this is actually a liquid hydrogen vehicle. So there's 2 tanks of about 40 kilograms each. And the reason why I asked, everything we'd seen up until there was actually compressed gas. And here we're entering a liquid hydrogen vehicle. And it's because the range is a lot longer, that you can get up to 1,000 kilometers of this vehicle. It takes 10 minutes to refuel, and you don't sacrifice any payload. But of course, liquid hydrogen is pretty volatile, so there's a lot of debate and discussion now that still has to be had, and will still continue in the future, on liquid versus compressed gas moving forward. But just a year ago, I don't know how many of you were here at the conference, I had a panel on alternative fuels. And I remember this topic being discussed robustly. And me looking at one of the panelists and says, well, is hydrogen myth or is it reality? And he looked at me and he said, no, it's a reality. It exists. And here we see that it does exist. Yes, it's got a long way to go, but we already got concept trucks that are being tested. We went to Ulm, which is in the region of Baden-Württemberg, to a solar research facility where they're focusing on how it's shifted from just looking at a light motor vehicle to heavy-duty trucks. And that's when I got to see the first refueling, hydrogen refueling station. I did want to pose with a photograph holding the nozzle, but it was too volatile. You can't really do that. So that was quite interesting for me. But we learned a lot there. And I think what was staggering is that there is over 400 scientists and technical people solely looking at how do we mainstream this? How do we make it viable for this industry in specific? I mean, that's a lot of brain power just looking at and how do we make this viable? So part of the insights there was we were talking about costs. I mean, costs aren't as clear as obviously what they could be, but we were given very high level that if hydrogen is transported, it's around 12 euro per litre or kilogram. If it's manufactured on site, it's around 5 to 4 euro per kilogram. So it's really clear for me, the value chain, that it's going to be more cost, it can only be really cost effective if the hydrogen is manufactured on site at a refueling station. So the role and importance of research and development. Platinum fuel cells are obviously mainstream now, and places like where we were are actually looking at how do we make it more efficient? How do we use materials that are more efficient? But this places South Africa in a unique position because we are responsible globally for 73% of the world's platinum. So that really does put us in a very strong angle in that perspective. Another few insights around hydrogen there is that there's a lot of technology and research being done in battery storage. So battery storage is clearly a big issue. It's a big touch point, and there's a lot of work going into how do we improve battery storage. And renewable energy. How do we improve the renewable energy in order to manufacture hydrogen? And what other opportunities are there in the transport sector in terms of shipping and aviation? So hydrogen requires a lot of energy and water. We're talking 50 kilowatts per kilogram and 50 liters per kilogram, 1 kilogram of hydrogen. And South Africa is a water-stressed country, so this could be a bit of a challenge for us moving forward, but we definitely do have the radiation levels in order to pull it off from a renewable side of things. But infrastructure is going to be critical in terms of building that capacity. One of my favorite presentations was with Adam Whitwell. He is with the German ministry, and he is part of the Ministry of Transport and Digitization, which I thought was quite an interesting grouping. And it shows the role of technologies playing at the moment in transport. Germany have a 48% reduction target of emissions for the heavy-duty freight industry by 2019, off a 2019 baseline year. I don't know if you can recall, but our green transport paper is calling for a 5% reduction target for South Africa. So we're definitely going to see increased reduction targets. And as the Minister also alluded to, transport is going to become a focus area for sure in terms of emissions reduction. So I'm sure we're going to start seeing harder targets coming through. Another thing which was quite interesting is that the state there accepted a graduation from grey hydrogen to green hydrogen. So there was this acceptance that it takes time, and that there isn't a silver bullet. It's not going to only be hydrogen. It could be electric. It could be alternative biofuels, for example. It's really, there are nuances around each technology and the applicability of each technology, and it's going to take a combination of these technologies in order for us to move that dial to get to a net zero. Another thing which was pretty cool is that they've got quite a lot of money to invest, currently €9 billion, and they're looking for partners to invest in. And really, hydrogen is a core part of their decarbonisation strategy. And it's not just hydrogen, but it's also the value chain. So we've got two dual roles to play here. It's not only using the hydrogen, but also being part of that value chain. So some of the insights they shared, which is really valuable for us as we embark on this journey, is, again, I think this is a bit overused, but collaboration is essential. We have to collaborate here. It's going to be critical in order for us to make this work. Technical expertise is a must. We had so much technical information shared with us, really, I thought my brain was about to explode. But the nuances with the technology, and it's really important that we have the right technical expertise looking at it and understanding it. Because, little knowledge is dangerous, and it's also not enough knowledge in how the hydrogen is manufactured, how it can be used, is also dangerous. So it's really important that we have the right technical expertise in this space, and we do have in our country. Consistency is essential as well. Consistency in funding these projects, in application of funding, so that's pretty critical on their part. And also, again, infrastructure. I think we feel that not only with the hydrogen value chain, but also with battery electric. So we were very excited to actually go see a hydrogen plant in action. And you can see that this is an alkaline electrolyzer plant, and we actually saw it in action. Those tanks over there in the background, that cumulatively holds a ton of hydrogen. We got to drive in the Toyota Mirai, which is a hydrogen vehicle. And I'm not going to lie, I did kind of feel like I was sitting on a nuclear bomb of sorts, because the tanks are under my seat in the back. And, you do have this misconception, and I had a long chat with the driver, and he said, you know what, even if we were in an accident, the tank technology is quite advanced. It would really take a lot for that to happen. But it is a misconception. One thing I loved about this site visit, you can see the biogas plant. And when you start talking about impacts on society and how you can bring your community stakeholders in, also, when we arrived, there were all these apple trees, and they were beautifully full, and people just picking them. And at lunch, we had apple juice, and my German's a bit rusty, but I asked the CEO there, I said, is this what I think it is? And there's a community that they use the apples to make the apple juice. They use it to make other products. The heat from the biogas manufacturer actually gets channeled into this container where it dries the wood, because it's a very wet climate, so the wood doesn't dry that often, and the community are happy to come and help themselves to dry wood. So it has really nice byproducts. I think this was, for me, like the absolute ultimate, and a charging station. And not just any charging station. This is a hydrogen, biogas, and an electric charging station. And this was in Norway. And there it exists. You think, does this stuff, is it real? Does it exist? It does exist. And it's mainly used for light motor vehicles, but it's scalable. So renewable energy everywhere. So Europe at the time that I was there was in a different form of an energy crisis. One of the guys was telling me that their energy price has gone up 10 times in 1 year, which is really adding to the costs of manufacture. And they have a lot of onshore wind. This is in Norway. And also every single house has got a solar panel on. I mean, the climate is not nearly as advantageous as ours in terms of capturing solar. In actual fact, we have the highest solar radiation levels globally for solar power. And we actually do have a renewable energy power plant footprint in this country, and I'm sure there's more to add to this map, but we have this renewable energy footprint. However, saying that, if hydrogen is going to scale up to where it needs to scale up, we're going to need almost double that, actually quadruple that. So it is a limiting factor in terms of our production ability for hydrogen. So the future is green, and South Africa as a country is perfectly placed to take advantage of these opportunities. I think we're still a very long way away. Many of the manufacturers are saying, vehicles are only going to really come online 2026 up until 2030. And of course, there are lots of nuances in terms of how the technology can be applied to various operations. But standing here a year ago, I would never have been able to share the level of where things actually are currently sitting in Europe. And it's the start of a journey even there, but it's gaining traction because it's got a lot of attention and a lot of focus. So I'm very excited about this space, and I think as an industry we need to keep an eye on it. With strategic choices like this, you've got three options. You can either react, adapt, or anticipate. And the only way you're going to unlock real value is if you anticipate. We've got this perfect opportunity now to start understanding this more in depth for our industry. And I'm really excited about the way forward. Thank you.
Right, as you might anticipate, we've got some questions for you. Let me just open for a second. There we go. Mm-hmm. All right, here's a question. What is the impact of green hydrogen on water volumes, considering the water shortages and things like day zero? Is it really a viable option environmentally?
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion around using desalination plants for that. In fact, when Liesl launched, discussed about opening up their N3 corridor program, they were talking about going the desalination route and using that. So it is a concern. I mean, water and heat are two of South Africa's biggest climate pressure points. So it is definitely a concern. So we'll have to see how that plays out.
What are the South African applicable ways that fleet owners can reduce carbon emissions? Is it carbon exhaust catchers versus driver behavior? And which alternative fuels for South Africa?
So, we are perfectly placed. I mean, any transporter is really looking at how to reduce fuel costs as much as possible. So efficiency, for me, still is the most important thing. Driver behavior, number one priority. I've always said you can put a driver in the most fuel-efficient vehicle, but if he's not driving it like he should, you're not going to get the savings. So driver behavior, really, really important. Things like regular maintenance, making sure your equipment is running as smoothly as possible, your route planning so that you're not running unnecessarily dead kilometers, for example. All of these things, and we know them as an industry, but they all cumulatively get you to a point where you can run as efficiently as possible. And I think a lot of our transporters are already doing that. This is now, how do we get to that next level of alternative fuel options? And just going back to your point, there are some LPG vehicles that are running. Electric is really coming into the market now. So there are a few options, but it's very specific to your type of operating conditions that you're running.
Should we not be concerned about the environmental impact of batteries at end of life?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Solar panels as well. Even trucks. I mean, again, someone mentioned about dumping in Africa. If you're running all electric vehicles and we've got diesel and all of a sudden we get 1 million diesel trucks dumped here that we need to start using. How is that going to help us? So it is a concern, but I do feel that the amount of level of research and attention given to it, that they will find a solution. There is no solution as yet, but I'm sure that there will be one eventually. But it is a concern.